I should have noticed the pattern sooner. How Marilyn would schedule family photos when she knew I had work commitments. How she'd accidentally forget to include me on the group text about wardrobe coordination. How she'd arrange everyone with military precision, only to casually suggest I take this one, so someone else's spouse wouldn't be left out. The way she'd flip through the Richardson family album during holidays, pointing out 3 generations of history while conveniently skipping the pages where Ethan and I appeared together. But somehow, I wasn't prepared for that crisp autumn afternoon at Silver Creek Falls when I arrived 15 minutes early for the annual family photo, only to discover they'd already taken it. "Oh, Olivia, did we get the time wrong?" Marilyn's surprise seemed almost genuine as she checked her watch. "We finished up about 20 minutes ago. The lighting was perfect, and the photographer had another appointment." Behind her, Ethan looked uncomfortable. Natalie avoided my eyes, and Richard studied something fascinating on his shoe. The photographer was packing up, family shots complete. The Richardson dynasty documented for another year, without the woman who had been married to their eldest son for 3 years. I stood there in my carefully selected cream sweater that had taken weeks to find, the one that matched the Richardson family color scheme I'd been given, holding a thermos of hot chocolate I'd made for everyone. My hands trembled slightly as I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was the culmination of a pattern, the final confirmation that I would always be considered temporary, unworthy of permanent placement in the visual history of the family I had married into. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'd always valued family photographs. Growing up in Denver with parents who documented everything, our home was a gallery of milestones and mundane moments alike. "Pictures are promises," my mother used to say. "Promises that we won't forget, the people we love." When I married Ethan after a whirlwind romance that began at a mutual friend's wedding in Portland, I imagined our life would be captured in similar visual testimony, evidence of belonging, of being cherished. The early signs of Marilyn's resistance were subtle. At our wedding, she insisted on countless photos with just immediate family, which somehow never included me. When I'd gently point this out, she'd wave dismissively. "We'll get some with you later, dear. We just need the Richardson shots first." Later never seemed to arrive. For the first year of our marriage, I made excuses for these slights. "She's just traditional," I told Ethan. "She needs time to adjust." I bent over backward trying to fit into their world, learning family recipes, participating in their traditions, even taking up golf because it was the Richardson Sunday ritual. I memorized names of distant cousins and childhood stories. I sent thoughtful gifts and handwritten thank you notes. I was the perfect daughter-in-law in every respect, except, apparently, in being worthy of photographic memory. By our second anniversary, the pattern had become unmistakable. At Natalie's baby shower, I was asked to take the photos rather than be in them. During the family reunion at Cannon Beach, I was pulled out of line at the last minute to check if the timer is working on the camera. At Christmas, I was positioned at the edge of every group shot, easily cropped out when Marilyn ordered prints or created her elaborate holiday cards. "You're being paranoid," Ethan would say when I raised concerns. "Mom's not doing it on purpose." But I'd catch the shadow of doubt in his eyes, the flicker of recognition that maybe, just maybe, his mother was indeed methodically erasing me from family history. The Silver Creek Falls incident was different, too blatant to ignore, too calculated to excuse. As we drove home in silence, Ethan finally spoke. "I'll talk to her. This wasn't right." "It wasn't just not right," I replied, staring out the window at the passing trees. "It was the clearest message possible that after 3 years, your mother still doesn't see me as part of this family." His conversation with Marilyn resulted in a bouquet of flowers delivered to our apartment and a card with an elegant non-apology. Misunderstandings happen in even the closest families. Looking forward to seeing you at Thanksgiving. No acknowledgement of the pattern, no promise to change. That evening, as I arranged the peace offering lilies in a vase, something shifted inside me. I had been trying to earn a place in photographs that documented a family story Marilyn had no intention of including me in. Perhaps it was time to start capturing my own story instead. Photography had always been a hobby, inherited from my father, who taught me to use his old Nikon when I was 12. Over the years, I'd taken thousands of photos, but rarely shared them beyond close friends. That night, I dug out my camera, blew off the dust, and began taking pictures of our apartment, the home Ethan and I had created together. The vintage record player we'd found at a Portland flea market, the mismatched coffee mugs that told the story of our weekend adventures, the plant that somehow survived our honeymoon absence. I posted a few images on my dormant Instagram account with the simple caption, "Documenting what matters." The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Friends commented on the composition, the lighting, the emotional quality of these seemingly ordinary objects. Encouraged, I began carrying my camera everywhere. I captured the rain-slicked streets of Portland, the steam rising from coffee cups at our favorite neighborhood cafe, Ethan laughing as he tried to assemble a bookshelf. I photographed strangers, with permission, who caught my attention. The elderly man with stories etched into the lines of his face, the young mother gently wiping ice cream from her daughter's chin, the street musician whose fingers danced across guitar strings. I created a separate Instagram account dedicated to these images, calling it Pictures and Promises, after my mother's saying. Within 2 months, I had over 10,000 followers. People connected with the honesty of these moments, the way they celebrated the beauty in ordinary lives. A local gallery owner reached out, interested in featuring my work in an upcoming exhibition focused on family in the modern age. As my confidence grew through this unexpected avenue of expression, my perspective on the Richardson family dynamics began to shift. I stopped trying to force my way into their photographs and instead focused on creating my own visual narrative. Ethan, seeing my passion reignite, became my biggest supporter. He'd point out potential shots, help me set up equipment, and proudly share my growing portfolio with friends. "Your work is amazing," he said one evening as we scrolled through my latest uploads. "You see things other people miss." "I think being an outsider gives you a different perspective," I replied. "You notice what others take for granted." Thanksgiving arrived with the usual Richardson fanfare. The sprawling Lake Oswego home, decorated to magazine perfection, the table set with heirloom china, every detail orchestrated by Marilyn. I brought my camera, not with any hope of being included in family photos, but to document the day through my own lens. As everyone bustled around with pre-dinner preparations, I quietly captured moments. Richard teaching his grandson how to fold napkins into swans, Natalie's husband sneaking a taste of mashed potatoes when he thought no one was looking, Zach's new girlfriend nervously adjusting her earrings before meeting grandmother Eleanor. During dinner, cousin Courtney mentioned she'd seen my photography online. "I had no idea you were so talented, Olivia. Those black and white portraits you did last week were stunning." Conversation paused as everyone turned toward me. I felt my cheeks warm under the sudden attention. "What portraits?" Marilyn asked, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. Ethan beamed proudly. "Olivia's photography has really taken off. She's been featured in Portland Monthly, and she has a gallery exhibition coming up in January." The table erupted with questions. Even grandmother Eleanor, who rarely spoke directly to me, wanted to know about my technique. I explained how Photography had become both passion and profession for me, how I'd recently been hired to shoot for a few local businesses and was building a modest but growing client list. Throughout the conversation, I noticed Marilyn watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not her usual calculating assessment, but something closer to surprise, perhaps even reassessment. After dinner, as everyone moved to the living room for coffee, she approached me. "Your photography, is it just a hobby or something more?" There was no condescension in her tone, only genuine curiosity. "It started as a way to document what matters to me," I answered honestly. "Now it's becoming something more." She nodded, slowly. "Richard mentioned your exhibition. Perhaps we might attend?" The invitation, hesitant as it was, felt like the first genuine overture she'd made in our entire relationship. "I'd like that," I said simply. December brought a phone call that changed everything. A prominent regional magazine wanted to feature my work in their annual Northwest Voices issue. The theme was chosen family, and they were drawn to the authenticity of my portraits showing connection beyond traditional family structures. The feature would include an interview and a spread of my photographs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When the magazine hit newsstands in January, my exhibition opened simultaneously. The gallery was packed. Friends, colleagues, strangers who had followed my work online, and yes, the entire Richardson family. Marilyn and Richard arrived early, carefully studying each photograph with the attention usually reserved for examining potential flaws. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a series called Belonging, portraits of diverse families and moments of genuine connection. The final image in the series caught everyone by surprise. Ethan in our kitchen, laughing as Flower dusted his dark hair, attempting to recreate a Richardson family recipe with my guidance. The caption read, "Family isn't always who raised you, but also who you choose to become." That photograph was purchased within the first hour by an anonymous buyer. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned, Marilyn approached me with a glass of champagne. "That photo of Ethan in your kitchen," she said quietly. "It captured something I've never seen in our family photographs." "What's that?" I asked. "Joy without performance." She took a sip of champagne, her eyes fixed on the empty space where the sold photograph had hung. "Our family photos have always been about presentation, the right clothes, the right smiles, the right people." She emphasized the last word slightly. "Your work shows something different, something real." It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But it was an acknowledgement. The success of the exhibition led to more commissions, more features in design, and lifestyle magazines. By spring, I had enough work to quit my day job and pursue photography full-time. Ethan and I converted our spare bedroom into a proper studio, and I began specializing in family portraiture, not the stiff-posed shots that populated the Richardson albums, but authentic captures of families in their natural environments. In May, I received an unexpected email from Marilyn. The subject line read simply, "A proposition." She explained that the Richardson family reunion was approaching, their 30th annual gathering at Cannon Beach. The photographer they usually hired had retired, and she wondered, her phrasing delicate, almost tentative, if I might consider taking the family photographs this year. My finger hovered over the reply button. This was not a small request. This was Marilyn Richardson, guardian of family imagery, keeper of generational documentation, asking me, the woman she had systematically kept out of the visual family record, to create that record. I showed the email to Ethan. "What do you think she really wants?" He read it twice before answering. "I think she might be trying to make amends in the only way she knows how." After careful consideration, I agreed. But I set clear parameters. I would photograph the family, but I would do it my way. Natural, authentic, unstaged. Marilyn accepted my terms without negotiation, a first in our relationship. The reunion weekend arrived with perfect June weather. I moved through the beach house and surrounding dunes, camera in hand, capturing moments rather than orchestrating them. Richard teaching the youngest grandchildren to fly kites. Natalie and her husband stealing a moment alone on the porch swing. Zach and his now fiancé building an elaborate sandcastle. Cousins reconnecting after years apart. Marilyn watched from a distance as I worked, her expression unreadable. On the second evening, as sunset painted the sky in dramatic oranges and pinks, she approached me on the beach. "You haven't taken any photos with the entire family together," she observed. "I have something different in mind," I explained. "I'm capturing connections, not configurations." She nodded slowly, processing this departure from tradition. Then she asked the question that hung between us. "Will you be in any of the photos?" I lowered my camera and met her eyes directly. "No, Marilyn. I'm the photographer this time." Something shifted in her expression. Recognition, perhaps, of the role reversal. For years, she had maneuvered to keep me behind the camera rather than in front of it. Now I had claimed that position by choice, not by exclusion. "Ethan should have you in some photos," she insisted. "You're his wife. Your family." The words I had longed to hear for 4 years now came too late, or perhaps right on time. I smiled slightly. I document what matters to me now. I don't need to be in someone else's picture to know where I belong. Later that night, as I reviewed the day's shots on my laptop, there was a soft knock at the door. Marilyn entered carrying 2 mugs of tea. She set one beside me and glanced at the screen. "These are quite different from our usual family photos," she said, studying the candid images. "Yes," I agreed. "They're honest." She was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about what you said on the beach, about documenting what matters to you." She sat down on the edge of the bed. "The Richardson family photos have always been about continuity, about proving something. Your photos show what we actually are, not what we're trying to present." It was the closest she would come to acknowledging what she had done, the years of deliberate exclusion. I accepted it for what it was, not the full reckoning I might have once needed, but a step toward something new. The reunion photos were a sensation among the family when I delivered them 3 weeks later. Even grandmother Eleanor, traditional to her core, admitted they captured the real Richardsons, not just the Sunday best version. Marilyn had them framed and displayed throughout her home, candid shots replacing the formal portraits that had dominated the walls for decades. In September, as Ethan and I celebrated our 4th wedding anniversary with a small dinner party in our backyard, Marilyn pulled me aside. She held an envelope containing a check for the reunion photographs, which I had already told her I wouldn't accept payment for. "I insist," she said, pressing the envelope into my hands. "The photos were my gift to the family," I replied, trying to return it. "Then consider this my investment in your next exhibition." Her voice softened. "And a down payment on future family photographs, including the ones I hope you'll take at Thanksgiving, with you in them." I held her gaze, recognizing the complex mixture of pride and remorse in her eyes. "We'll see," answered, neither accepting nor rejecting the olive branch she extended. That night, after our guests had gone and Ethan had fallen asleep, I sat in our living room looking through our own collection of photographs, the ones that mattered to me. Images of the life we had built together, the friends who had become our chosen family, the moments that would never appear in the carefully curated Richardson albums, but that told our authentic story. I realized that Marilyn's exclusion, painful as it had been, had pushed me to create something far more valuable than a place in her family portraits. It had pushed me to document my own vision, to build a career around seeing and celebrating what others overlooked, to find power in my perspective as an outsider. Next week, the Richardson family will gather for their first professional holiday portrait session in my studio. Marilyn has been calling daily with questions about what they should wear, who should stand where, how to create the perfect family image. I smile at her messages, at this strange reversal of our positions. She now seeks my approval, my vision, my inclusion of her in the pictures that matter. The woman who once banished me from family photos now begs to be featured in mine. I haven't decided yet if I'll set up the tripod and join them in the frame. Perhaps I will. Perhaps I won't. The power lies in knowing it's entirely my choice, and that regardless of where I stand when the shutter clicks, I am exactly where I belong. The studio session with the Richardson family became a turning point in ways I never anticipated. I transformed my downtown Portland space into an environment that felt more like a living room than a photography studio. Soft lighting, comfortable seating, music playing quietly in the background. When they arrived, I noticed immediately how differently they carried themselves in my territory. Marilyn's usual commanding presence seemed muted. She looked to me for direction, rather than imposing her own. "Where should we stand?" she asked, smoothing her carefully selected cream blouse, the same shade I'd worn to Silver Creek Falls a year earlier. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. "We're not doing traditional poses today," I explained, gesturing toward the cozy arrangement I'd created. "I want you to interact naturally, talk to each other, share stories. I'll capture what happens." Confusion flickered across her face. "But we need a formal portrait for the holiday cards." "We'll get there," I assured her. "But first, I want images that reveal who you actually are as a family, not just how you present yourselves." For the first hour, they were stiff, self-conscious, performing their idea of casual interaction. I kept shooting, knowing these weren't the images I wanted, but letting them exhaust their ingrained formality. Gradually, as they relaxed into the environment, authentic moments emerged. Richard telling a story about his first car that made Natalie laugh until tears streamed down her face. Zach and his fiancée debating playfully about their upcoming wedding plans. The youngest grandchildren abandoning decorum entirely to build a fort from my prop pillows. Throughout it all, I noticed Marilyn watching me, not just my actions as the photographer, but my interactions with Ethan, the easy way we communicated with glances and small gestures born from years of partnership. When I set up for a more structured group shot, she remained uncharacteristically quiet, accepting my placement of family members rather than rearranging them according to her hierarchy. "Olivia," she said suddenly as I adjusted my lighting, "you should be in this one." The room went silent. Every Richardson knew the significance of this invitation. "I'm the photographer today," I reminded her, repeating my words from the beach. "Marcus could take this one," she suggested, gesturing to my assistant who was adjusting equipment in the corner. "Just one with all of us, together." The word hung in the air between us, together, after years of deliberate separation. Ethan watched me, his expression careful. He wanted this, wanted some resolution, some healing, but was leaving the decision entirely to me. I studied Marilyn's face for any trace of the calculated manipulation I'd grown so accustomed to detecting. Instead, I saw something unfamiliar in her expression. Vulnerability, perhaps even regret. "One photo," I agreed finally. The resulting image became the centerpiece of my next exhibition. Not because of its technical perfection or artistic composition, but because of the story beneath its surface. In the photograph, the Richardsons are arranged in their natural family groupings. Natalie with her husband and children, Zach with his fiancée, Richard at Marilyn's side. Ethan stands slightly apart from his nuclear family, his arm wrapped around my waist, his expression a mixture of pride and protectiveness. What makes the image remarkable isn't the arrangement, but the way Marilyn is turned slightly toward me rather than toward the camera. Her expression caught in a moment of genuine curiosity, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. When the image was displayed 6 months later in a Seattle gallery, a curator described it as a study in familial redefinition. He couldn't have known how accurate that assessment was. The studio session marked the beginning of a gradual shift in my relationship with Marilyn. Not friendship. We were too different, had too much history for that, but a wary mutual respect. She began following my professional Instagram account, leaving occasional comments that showed she was paying attention to my artistic choices. When Ethan and I hosted dinner parties, she would arrive with thoughtful hostess gifts that reflected knowledge of my preferences rather than hers. Small acknowledgments that I was a person in my own right, not just an extension of her son. In January, almost 5 years into our marriage, Ethan and I decided to buy our first home. The Portland real estate market was competitive, but we found a 1920s craftsman in need of renovation that spoke to both of us. The purchase stretched our finances to the breaking point, leaving little for the extensive updates the house needed. "We'll do it bit by bit," Ethan assured me as we stood in the empty living room after closing, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and creaky floorboards. "It'll be our long-term project." A week later, Richard called with an unexpected proposition. "Marilyn and I would like to help with your renovation," he said, "as a housewarming gift." I held the phone away from my ear, staring at it in disbelief before responding. "That's very generous, but—" "Before you decline," he interrupted gently, "you should know this was Marilyn's idea. And it's not about controlling your choices or imposing her taste. She specifically said, and I'm quoting here, "It's their home. We'd just like to help make it what they want it to be." The offer was substantial enough to completely renovate the kitchen, the heart of the home, and the space that needed the most work. After discussing it with Ethan, we accepted with clear boundaries. We would design the space, choose the materials, and hire the contractors. Their contribution would be financial only. To my surprise, Marilyn adhered completely to these terms. When I invited her to see the design plans, she asked questions that showed genuine interest without offering unsolicited suggestions. When she saw the finished space 3 months later, her approval seemed sincere rather than performative. "You have an exceptional eye for design," she remarked, running her hand along the butcher block countertop we'd selected. "Not unlike your photography. You see possibilities others miss." Coming from Marilyn, this was extraordinary praise. As my photography business continued to grow, I developed a specialty in what I called legacy portraits, multi-generational, family photography that captured authentic connections and relationships. My approach attracted clients tired of stiff, formal family portraits. I became known for spending time with families before ever taking a photograph, observing their dynamics, learning their stories, identifying the genuine moments of connection worth preserving. Ironically, this approach was partly inspired by everything I'd learned from being excluded from the Richardson family photographs. The understanding that family imagery isn't just decoration, but documentation. That who is included and how they're portrayed reveals profound truths about belonging and value. In September, Zach and his fiancée were married in a beautiful ceremony at the Portland Japanese Garden. Naturally, they asked me to be their photographer. I hesitated initially. I rarely photographed weddings and never for family, but their request seemed genuine, not obligatory. They valued my aesthetic, they explained, and trusted me to capture their day authentically. Throughout the ceremony and reception, I moved among the guests, focusing my lens on genuine emotions rather than posed moments. Richard wiping away tears as Zach recited his vows. Natalie's children dancing with uninhibited joy. Grandmother Eleanor sharing a quiet moment with the bride, passing down advice with hands clasped together. When it came time for family photographs, I had arranged for my assistant Marcus to take over so I could join Ethan. As I handed him my camera and prepared to step into the frame, Marilyn approached. "Could I see some of what you've captured today?" she asked, her voice uncharacteristically tentative. I showed her a few images on my camera's display, candid shots that captured the emotional essence of the day. She studied them intently. "You see us so clearly," she said finally. "All of us. As we really are." She looked up at me. "I've been thinking about something. The family albums, all those years of Richardson photographs, they tell such an incomplete story." I waited, unsure where she was heading with this. "I'd like you to help me create a new family archive," she continued. "Not to replace the old one, but to complement it. To show what those formal portraits couldn't capture." The request stunned me. Marilyn's albums were her most prized possessions, meticulously maintained visual evidence of the Richardson legacy. Asking me to reinterpret that legacy was no small concession. "It would be a significant project," I said carefully. "I know, and I'll understand if you decline." Her voice held none of the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to detecting. "But I think it's important. For all of us." After considerable thought, I agreed to the project with clear professional boundaries. We would work together one weekend a month. I would have complete creative control, and I would be compensated at my standard professional rate, a point I insisted on despite her initial resistance. This wasn't a favor. It was a collaboration between professionals. The Richardson Archive Project, as we came to call it, began with digitizing decades of family photographs. As I worked with these images, scanning and organizing them chronologically, I noticed patterns I hadn't been able to see when viewing the albums in their carefully curated presentation. The way certain family members were consistently centered while others were marginalized. The identical poses repeated year after year, creating an illusion of unchanging perfection. The gradual disappearance of anyone who didn't conform to the Richardson ideal. "There's an entire shadow history here," I told Marilyn as we reviewed the digital files. "All the people who were edited out over time." She nodded slowly. "My mother-in-law did the same to me when I first married Richard. I was positioned at the edges, easily cropped out if necessary, until I proved I was going to be permanent." The revelation stunned me. "You never mentioned that." "No," she acknowledged. "I didn't. And then I repeated the pattern with you." She met my gaze directly. "I'm not proud of that." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the most direct acknowledgement she had ever made of her behavior. The next phase of our project involved creating new images to complement the historical record, photographs that captured the contemporary Richardson family in authentic moments rather than posed perfection. I began attending family gatherings not just as Ethan's wife or a professional photographer, but as a documentarian of family history. I recorded stories as well as images, creating audio files of family members sharing memories that traditional photographs couldn't capture. Working together on this project altered my relationship with Marilyn in unexpected ways. We still disagreed, frequently, her instinct for control clashing with my insistence on authenticity. But the disagreements had a different quality. They were professional debates rather than power struggles, focused on the work rather than on our relationship. In November, 6 months into the project, Ethan and I shared news that would further transform family dynamics. We were expecting our first child. The pregnancy had been confirmed just the week before, and we were still adjusting to the idea ourselves. The Richardson family responded with predictable enthusiasm, immediate questions about due dates and gender, offers of hand-me-down baby equipment, suggestions for names. But Marilyn's reaction was more subdued, more thoughtful. Later that evening, as guests were preparing to leave, she found me alone in the kitchen. "I've been thinking about the family archive," she said, "about what we're creating for future generations." I nodded, waiting. "Your child will be the first of a new generation of Richardsons." She spoke carefully, as if measuring each word. "I want them to see themselves in our family story from the very beginning. Not just in your photographs, but in all our documentation." "What are you suggesting?" I asked. A restructuring of how we think about family imagery moving forward. Not just your professional work, but our everyday documentation. More inclusive, more authentic. She hesitated. The way you've always approached it. The acknowledgement that my approach had value, that it might even become the new standard for family documentation, represented a seismic shift in Marilyn's thinking. As my pregnancy progressed, this shift manifested in tangible ways. When Marilyn hosted the annual family Easter celebration, she asked me to help design a photo area where family members could take casual pictures throughout the day. When we learned we were having a daughter, she presented us with a carefully restored antique frame, suggesting it might someday hold our daughter's photograph alongside images of 5 generations of Richardson women. Most significantly, when my mother visited from Denver to help prepare the nursery, Marilyn invited both of us to lunch, a gesture of inclusion that acknowledged my family would also shape her grandchild's heritage. In my 7th month, complications arose that required bed rest for the remainder of my pregnancy. My photography business had to be temporarily suspended, creating both financial strain and creative frustration. Unable to work or even move around freely, I felt my hard-won independence slipping away. Marilyn surprised me by suggesting a collaborative project we could work on while I was confined to bed, a family cookbook that would combine recipes with photographs and stories. She would handle the recipe testing and collection. I would direct the visual documentation from my laptop, using a combination of historical family photographs and new images captured by my assistant. "This is something tangible we can create for your daughter," she explained. "A record of her heritage that engages all the senses." The project gave me purpose during difficult weeks and created unexpected space for conversation. As we sorted through recipes and images, Marilyn shared stories I'd never heard, about her own mother's difficult relationship with her mother-in-law, about her early struggles to fit into the Richardson family, about her fear that Ethan's marriage would diminish her relationship with her son. "I thought I was protecting our family traditions," she admitted one afternoon, as we debated which version of the Richardson holiday pie recipe to include. "But I was really just protecting my position." It was the closest we had come to discussing the years of exclusion directly. Not quite accountability, but a glimpse of self-awareness. "What changed?" I asked. She considered the question carefully. "Seeing myself through your lens," she said finally. "Both literally in your photographs and figuratively in how you persisted despite my behavior. You showed me a different way to think about family, not as something fixed and hierarchical, but as something that can expand and evolve while still honoring its roots." Our daughter, Eleanor Rose Chen Richardson, was born on a rainy April morning after 30 hours of labor. She arrived with a full head of dark hair, her father's dimples, and what the delivery nurse called an old soul's gaze that seemed to take in everything around her. In the tender, exhausted hours after her birth, as Ethan and I marveled at her perfect features, there was a gentle knock at the hospital room door. Marilyn entered hesitantly, carrying not flowers or the traditional baby gift, but her professional camera. "I thought," she said softly, "you might want someone else to be the photographer, just this once, so you can be in the first pictures with your daughter." The offer, so simple yet so profound in what it acknowledged, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. For Marilyn to recognize my desire to be documented with my child, to be visibly present, from the very beginning of her life, represented a level of empathy I hadn't thought possible. "I'd like that," I managed, shifting Eleanor slightly in my arms. Marilyn approached the bed, adjusting her camera settings. "How would you like to be positioned? What's your vision for these first images?" The question, professional photographer to professional photographer, not mother-in-law to daughter-in-law, contained layers of respect it had taken years to build. "Just us as we are," I replied. "No posing, no performance." She nodded and began capturing images, my finger traced by Eleanor's tiny hand, Ethan's expression of wonder as he held his daughter, the three of us together in a tableau of new family. Not the formal, stiff portraits that had populated Richardson, albums for generations, but intimate, authentic documentation of genuine connection. When she finished, Marilyn showed me the images on her camera's display. They were surprisingly good. She had clearly been paying attention to my aesthetic over the years, absorbing elements of my style while maintaining her own perspective. "These are beautiful," I told her truthfully. "You have a natural eye." Her smile held a hint of irony. "Perhaps I should have been paying attention to your approach years ago." 2 weeks later, when we brought Eleanor to the Richardson family home for her first visit, I noticed something had changed in the formal living room. The large family portrait above the fireplace, a formal studio shot taken before Ethan and I were married, had been replaced. In its place hung a beautifully framed photograph I had taken at the last family Christmas, the entire extended family in unguarded celebration, with Marilyn at the center holding up a glass in mid-toast, her expression one of genuine joy rather than poised perfection. Beside it, newly hung, was a smaller frame containing one of the hospital photos Marilyn had taken. Ethan and I gazing down at Eleanor, exhausted but radiant with new parenthood. The message was clear. The definition of family record-keeping had expanded. The official visual history now had room for authenticity alongside formality, for candid emotion alongside careful composition. As I stood there, Eleanor sleeping against my shoulder, Marilyn joined me in contemplating the display. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about that first family photo session at Silver Creek Falls. The one She hesitated, then continued with unusual directness. "The one I deliberately scheduled to exclude you." I nodded, acknowledging both the action and the rare admission. "I'd like to go back there, all of us, including Eleanor, to create a new image that includes everyone." She glanced at me. "But only if you'll be both in the photograph and behind the camera. Your vision, your inclusion, a true family portrait. The symbolism of returning to Silver Creek Falls, the site of my most painful exclusion, to create an image of deliberate inclusion was powerful. But I had learned enough about photography and about family to know that meaningful images couldn't be created through symbolic gestures alone. "I appreciate what you're trying to do," I told her carefully, "but I don't think we need to recreate the past to move forward. We're already creating new images that tell a more honest story." She seemed momentarily disappointed, but nodded in acceptance. "You're right. It's not about the location. It's about who's included and why." That conversation marked another evolution in our relationship, my confident ability to decline her suggestions without fear of repercussion, her ability to accept my boundaries without interpreting them as rejection. As Eleanor grew from newborn to infant to toddler, my photography business evolved as well. The enforced pause during my pregnancy had given me time to reconsider my professional direction. While I still accepted commercial work and family portraiture, I began developing a body of work exploring the concept of belonging, how families document themselves, who gets included in the visual record, what these choices reveal about values and relationships. I created a series called Margins to Center that examined how family hierarchies are embedded in visual documentation. The work attracted attention from galleries and museums interested in the intersection of personal history and cultural commentary. I was invited to speak at photography conferences, art schools, even a TED Talk on visual storytelling and family dynamics. Throughout this professional evolution, my relationship with the Richardson family continued to develop in ways I couldn't have imagined during those early years of exclusion. Richard became an unexpected ally, often the first to proudly share news of my latest exhibition or publication. Natalie, who had once avoided eye contact during awkward family gatherings, now regularly consulted me about documenting her own growing family. Zach and his wife asked me to create a visual birth announcement when they welcomed their first child, Eleanor's cousin. Even grandmother Eleanor, who had maintained a polite distance throughout my early years in the family, developed a genuine connection with her namesake. Watching my daughter climb onto her great-grandmother's lap with a book became one of life's unexpected joys, a bridging of 4 generations that I documented not just as a photographer, but as a mother invested in her child's sense of heritage. Marilyn's transformation was perhaps the most profound. Without ever fully acknowledging or apologizing for the early years of exclusion, she demonstrated change through consistent action. She made space for my perspective in family discussions. She respected my parenting choices even when they differed from Richardson traditions. Most significantly, she became fiercely protective of my place in family documentation, insisting I appear in photographs rather than always being the one to take them. On Eleanor's 3rd birthday, the Richardsons gathered in our backyard for a celebration filled with balloons, homemade cake, and the cheerful chaos of toddlers at play. As presents were opened and children raced through sprinklers, I moved among the guests with my camera, capturing the kind of candid moments that had become my signature. At one point, I found Marilyn sitting quietly at the edge of the gathering, watching Eleanor with a contemplative expression. "Everything okay?" I asked, sitting beside her. "Just thinking," she replied, "about documentation and memory, about what we choose to preserve." I waited, sensing she had more to say. "I spent so many years curating this perfect family image," she continued, "controlling who was included, how we were posed, what story the photographs told." She gestured toward Eleanor, who was gleefully smashing frosting with her cousin. "But she'll grow up with a different kind of family record, one that shows real connection, not just arrangement." "That's the hope," I agreed. "Your influence," she acknowledged, "not just on the photographs themselves, but on how we think about what's worth capturing." She hesitated. "I've been meaning to ask you something. That first major exhibition of yours, the photo of Ethan in your kitchen with the flower. Do you know who purchased it?" I shook my head. "It was sold through the gallery to an anonymous buyer. I never found out who." "It was me," she admitted. "I wanted to have it, but I didn't want you to know at the time. I wasn't ready to acknowledge what it represented." "Which was what?" I asked. "That you saw my son more clearly than I did. That your vision, your way of documenting family, had a truth mine lacked." She smoothed her linen napkin, a characteristic gesture when discussing something difficult. "It hangs in my bedroom now, a daily reminder." The admission touched me deeply, not just the fact that she had been the buyer, but what the purchase had meant to her. A private acknowledgement of value long before she could express it publicly. "Thank you for telling me," I said simply. Later that evening, as the party wound down and guests began to leave, Marilyn approached me with her phone. "Would you mind?" she asked, gesturing toward where Ethan was helping Eleanor open her last present. "I'd like a photo of the 3 of you." I handed her my professional camera instead of taking her phone. "Use this," I offered. "The quality will be better." She accepted it with careful hands, clearly honored by the trust implied in lending my professional equipment. "How do I showed her the basic settings, positioning her for the best angle and light. "Just capture what you see," I advised, moving to join my family. As I settled beside Ethan and Eleanor, watching Marilyn frame the shot with concentration, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. From being the woman deliberately excluded from family photos to the one whose photographic vision had transformed how the entire Richardson family documented itself. From outsider to influential insider, from being erased to being essential. "Everyone look at Eleanor," Marilyn directed, embracing the photographer's traditional authority. But instead of looking at my daughter, I found myself watching Marilyn, this complicated woman who had once worked so hard to keep me at the margins of family documentation, now earnestly working to capture an image that centered me within it. The symmetry was both ironic and healing. "Perfect," she declared after taking several shots. "These are going to be beautiful." As she handed the camera back to me, our fingers brushed in the exchange. A small contact that once would have been fraught with tension, now simple and ordinary. I reviewed the images she had taken. Surprisingly good compositions that showed she had been paying attention to my work over the years. "You have a good eye," I told her, meaning it. She smiled, a genuine expression free from the calculation I'd once been so attuned to detecting. I've had an excellent teacher. 6 months later, when the Richardsons gathered for their traditional holiday portrait, now taken in my professional studio with my artistic direction, Marilyn brought a gift. A large, elegantly wrapped package that she presented with uncharacteristic nervousness. "Before we start," she said, addressing the assembled family, "I wanted to give this to Olivia. It seemed fitting to do it here, as we prepare for our family documentation." I unwrapped the package carefully, aware of the unusual silence that had fallen over the normally chattering Richardsons. Inside was a beautifully crafted album, its leather cover embossed with the words, "The Complete Richardson Family." The first page held a simple inscription in Marilyn's precise handwriting. "To correct the record and honor the truth. With gratitude for the vision you brought to our family." As I turned the pages, I realized what she had created. A comprehensive family album that integrated historical Richardson photographs with my contemporary images. But what brought tears to my eyes were the edited historical photos. In several of the formal portraits taken during my early years with Ethan, pictures from which I had been deliberately excluded, she had digitally integrated images of me from the same time period, placing me seamlessly within the family grouping. It was a symbolic correction of the historical record, a visual acknowledgement of the exclusion and an attempt to retroactively right the wrong. "This must have taken months," I said, genuinely moved by the effort involved. "It seemed important," Marilyn replied simply, "for Eleanor to have a complete record, for all of us to acknowledge the full truth of our family history, both the parts we're proud of and those we aren't." As I closed the album, holding this tangible symbol of transformation, I realized we had both come full circle. The woman who had once strategically kept me out of family photographs had now painstakingly restored my presence. And I, who had once desperately wanted to be included in her carefully composed family portraits, had found my power in creating my own visual narrative. "Thank you," I said, the words inadequate for the complex emotions the gift evoked. "This means more than I can express." Marilyn nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I thought we might display it at Eleanor's birthday next year, if that's all right with you." "I'd like that," I agreed. Then, making a spontaneous decision, I added, "And I think I might like to be in the family portrait today, not just taking it." Her smile held genuine pleasure. "We were hoping you would say that." As my assistant set up for the formal group shot and the Richardsons arranged themselves with familiar banter, I realized that the most powerful image wasn't the photograph we were about to take. It was the invisible one, the portrait of transformation that had occurred between a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law who had moved from exclusion to inclusion, from resentment to respect, from power struggle to partnership. The woman who had once banned me from family photos was now not just including me in them, but seeking to be included in mine. Not as an assertion of control, but as a recognition of value. Not out of obligation, but out of genuine connection. As we positioned ourselves for the portrait, Eleanor on my lap, Ethan's hand on my shoulder, Marilyn nearby but no longer centering herself in the composition, I thought about the power of documentation. How it can exclude or include, diminish or elevate, erase or affirm. How the story we tell through images shapes not just how others see us, but how we see ourselves. "Everyone ready?" my assistant called, finger poised above the shutter button. I looked around at this imperfect, evolving family that had become mine, not by blood or by marriage certificate alone, but through the complex, challenging work of creating genuine connection. The camera captured us not in stiff, formal arrangement, but in authentic relation to one another, the visual evidence of a family redefined. The changes had been subtle but significant in the 5 years since Marilyn presented me with that reconstructed family album. Eleanor was now 8, a thoughtful child with an artist's eye who could spend hours arranging her collection of smooth river stones into intricate patterns that she insisted I photograph before they change. She had my tendency toward quiet observation and Ethan's sudden sunshine smile that transformed her entire face. The Richardsons doted on her, of course, but with a respectfulness I appreciated, acknowledging her boundaries, her moods, her need for occasional solitude amid family chaos. My career had evolved in unexpected directions. What had begun as personal documentation had grown into a respected body of work examining the intersection of family imagery and cultural belonging. I'd published a book, Framing Family, that combined my photography with essays exploring how visual documentation shapes identity across generations. The success of that project had led to a prestigious grant allowing me to expand my research internationally, documenting family photography traditions across cultures. The Richardson Archive project, begun as a tentative collaboration between Marilyn and me, had developed into something neither of us had anticipated. What started as digitizing old family photographs had evolved into a multimedia installation that had been featured in museums across the Pacific Northwest. The exhibition juxtaposed historical family imagery with contemporary documentation, audio recordings of family stories, and interactive elements that invited viewers to reflect on their own family visual histories. Most surprising was how the project had drawn interest from researchers studying family dynamics and visual anthropology. Marilyn and I had been invited to speak at conferences, sharing our perspectives on how family documentation evolves across generations. These professional collaborations had further transformed our relationship. We weren't just mother-in-law and daughter-in-law navigating familial waters, but colleagues with complementary expertise. The Richardson family itself had grown and shifted. Natalie's children were teenagers now, navigating the complex waters of adolescence with varying degrees of grace. Zach and his wife had welcomed a second child, a son who shared Eleanor's birthday, creating a special bond between the cousins. Richard had retired fully from his dental practice, devoting himself to woodworking and doting on his grandchildren. Grandmother Eleanor had passed peacefully 2 winters ago, leaving behind a trove of handwritten recipes and letters that I'd helped the family preserve and document. On a crisp September morning, as I packed equipment for a 3-week documentary project in Japan, my first international assignment for the grant, my phone chimed with Marilyn's distinctive tone. Her calls were no longer cause for anxiety, but this one was unexpected. We'd just had Sunday dinner together 2 days earlier, and she knew I was preparing for my trip. "Olivia," her voice held an unfamiliar tightness. "I wonder if you might stop by today. There's something I'd like to discuss before you leave." The formality in her tone gave me pause. "Is everything all right?" Yes, she assured me quickly. "Nothing urgent, just something I'd prefer to talk about in person." I rearranged my schedule and drove to Lake Oswego that afternoon, curious about what couldn't wait until my return. The Richardson family. Home looked as immaculate as always, but something felt different as I entered. The formal living room, usually a showcase of perfect order, showed subtle signs of disruption. A drawer partially open, books rearranged, the sense that someone had been searching for something. Marilyn greeted me with her customary embrace, but I noticed immediately that she seemed distracted, her gaze not quite meeting mine. "Thank you for coming," she said. leading me toward the kitchen rather than the formal sitting area where we usually had our conversations. "Tea?" "Please," I agreed, taking a seat at the kitchen island. This room held memories of countless family gatherings, holiday preparations, and more recently, collaborative sessions reviewing materials for our archive project. As she busied herself with the kettle, I noticed a large envelope on the counter, its edges worn as if it had been handled repeatedly. Marilyn's gaze followed mine. "That's actually why I asked you to come," she said, abandoning the tea preparations, to sit beside me. "I've been going through Eleanor's things, my mother-in-law's, not your daughter's," she clarified with a small smile. The distinction between the two Eleanors was something we were all accustomed to making now. "Richard and I are considering downsizing," she continued. "The house is far too large for just the two of us, and maintaining it is becoming." She trailed off, uncharacteristically hesitant. "A lot of work," I finished for her. "Yes." She seemed relieved by my understanding. "We found a lovely condominium near the river, still spacious enough for family gatherings, but without all this." She gestured vaguely at the 5-bedroom house that had been the Richardson family hub for 3 decades. "That sounds sensible," I offered, still uncertain why this required an in-person conversation before my trip. She reached for the envelope. Going through Eleanor's belongings, I found these. She slid the envelope toward me. "I believe they belong in our archive project, but I wanted to speak with you directly before including them." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were photographs I'd never seen before, yellowed with age, many showing signs of having been folded or improperly stored. As I laid them out on the counter, I realized why Marilyn had been so careful in her approach. The images documented a family gathering from what appeared to be the early 1960s. A young Richard, perhaps 17, stood alongside his parents and grandparents. But what made the photographs remarkable was the presence of a young woman of Asian descent, standing close to Richard's grandfather, her expression a mixture of dignity and discomfort. I looked up at Marilyn questioningly. "Her name was Keiko Tanaka," Marilyn explained, her voice soft. "She was Richard's grandfather's second wife. They married shortly after his first wife, Richard's grandmother, died. The family never spoke of her. These photographs were hidden away in Eleanor's personal papers." I studied the images more carefully. In most of them, Keiko stood slightly apart from the family group, included but not integrated. In one particularly poignant shot, she sat at the edge of what appeared to be a holiday dinner, her posture suggesting someone trying to be as unobtrusive as possible. "Richard never mentioned her," I said, trying to process this revelation. "He barely remembers her," Marilyn explained. "The marriage lasted less than 2 years. After his grandfather died, the family, essentially, erased her. She chose, the word deliberately, its significance in our shared history unmistakable. No photographs on display, no mention of her name, as if she had never been part of the family. The parallel wasn't lost on me. A woman who had legally been part of the Richardson family, systematically removed from its visual history. The discovery felt both shocking and somehow inevitable. A pattern revealed that explained so much about the family dynamics I'd encountered. "Does Richard know you found these?" I asked. She nodded. "We've had several long conversations about it. He's been coming to terms with what it reveals about his family, about patterns neither of us recognized until now." I waited, sensing there was more. "I wanted to show these to you first," she continued, "because of what happened when you first joined our family. The way She paused, struggling for words in a way I'd rarely witnessed from this normally articulate woman. The way I continued this tradition of exclusion. It was the most direct acknowledgement she had ever made of those difficult early years. Not quite an apology, but a recognition of the pattern she had perpetuated. "What would you like to do with them?" I asked, redirecting to the practical question at hand. Relief flickered across her features. I think they should be included in the archive, properly documented with whatever information we can recover about her. Richard has reached out to some distant relatives who might know more. She met my gaze directly. But I wanted your perspective first. This feels like something we should decide together. The collaborative nature of the request, her recognition that this decision belonged to both of us, represented how far we had come. I considered what inclusion of these photographs would mean for the Richardson Archive project, how it would shift the narrative we had been constructing. I agree they should be included, I said finally, with context explaining both who she was and why these images were hidden. I paused, considering the broader implications. It's an opportunity to address the pattern directly, to acknowledge the history of exclusion while demonstrating how the family has evolved. Marilyn nodded, visibly relieved by my response. That's what I hoped you would say. She gathered the photographs carefully, returning them to their envelope. There's something else I wanted to discuss before your trip. She disappeared briefly into the adjacent study, returning with a leather-bound folder I recognized as one we used for the archive project's most valuable materials. From it, she withdrew what appeared to be a legal document. Richard and I have been discussing the future of the Richardson Archive, she explained. As we downsize and think about... She hesitated slightly. The next chapter of our lives, we've been considering what happens to the project long-term. She placed the document before me. It was a formal agreement establishing the Richardson Family Archive as a legal entity, with provisions for its maintenance and development. What caught my attention immediately was the proposed leadership structure, myself and Marilyn as co-directors during her lifetime, with sole directorship passing to me afterward. You want me to continue the archive after? I couldn't quite finish the sentence. After I'm no longer able to, she completed it matter-of-factly. Yes, with funding provisions to support that work. She tapped a section outlining a substantial endowment. No one else understands both the historical context and the contemporary importance the way you do, and no one else has your vision for how family documentation should evolve. The trust implied in this proposal, not just of my professional capabilities, but of my commitment to the Richardson legacy, was profound. This woman who had once worked so diligently to keep me at the margins of family documentation was now entrusting me with becoming its permanent guardian. This is significant, I said, needing time to process the implications. I'm honored by your trust, but I'd like to think about it carefully. Perhaps we could discuss it more thoroughly when I return from Japan. She seemed to have anticipated this response. Of course. I just wanted you to have this to consider during your trip. A small smile played at her lips. I've learned that your best insights often come when you're seeing things from a distance. The observation was perceptive, and another indication of how well she had come to know me over the years. I did often find clarity when physically removed from situations, viewing them through the lens of geographical as well as emotional distance. As I prepared to leave, Marilyn walked me to the door, our conversation shifting to practical matters about my upcoming trip. But at the threshold, she paused, her expression turning serious once more. Finding those photographs of Keiko? She began, then paused to organize her thoughts. It made me realize something. The Richardson family has a history of determining who belongs by controlling who appears in the visual record. For generations. I nodded, acknowledging this insight into the family dynamic. What you've done, she continued, challenging that pattern, creating a different kind of visual documentation. It hasn't just changed how we take photographs. It's changed how we think about family itself. She met my gaze directly. I wanted you to know that before you left. The acknowledgement, so clear, so direct, caught me by surprise. After all these years of subtle shifts and unspoken recognitions, this explicit statement of impact felt momentous. "Thank you," I said simply, the words inadequate for the complex emotions her statement evoked. She squeezed my hand briefly, another of those small physical connections that had once been so fraught, now comfortable and reassuring. "Safe travels. Bring back beautiful images." The Japan assignment proved even more intense and immersive than I had anticipated. I spent 3 weeks documenting family photography traditions across generations, from formal, multi-generational portraits in rural villages to the explosion of digital documentation in Tokyo's urban landscape. I interviewed elderly photographers who had maintained family studios for decades, young parents navigating social media sharing of their children's images, and curators preserving historical family photographs that had survived wars and natural disasters. Throughout this work, I found myself reflecting on the Richardson Archive project and Marilyn's proposal. There was a universal element to how families documented themselves, to the tensions between inclusion and exclusion, to the power dynamics embedded in who controlled the visual narrative. Yet there were also cultural specificities that illuminated the Richardson patterns in new ways. In one particularly moving interview, an elderly Japanese photographer showed me a series of family portraits spanning the American occupation after World War II. He pointed out subtle elements I might have missed: how families positioned themselves differently depending on whether the photographs were for private family viewing or public presentation, how certain family members were prominently featured or carefully minimized depending on the intended audience. "The public photograph and the private photograph tell different stories," he explained through my interpreter. "The skill is in reading what is not shown as much as what is." His observation resonated deeply with my experience of the Richardson family archives, the careful curation that had once excluded me, the hidden photographs of Keiko, the unspoken narratives embedded in who stood where and who remained unseen. In my final week in Japan, I visited a small museum dedicated to family photography in a rural prefecture. The curator, learning of my research, shared a collection of photographs from Japanese-American families who had been interned during World War II. The images were divided into 3 categories: photographs taken before internment, showing prosperous, integrated family life; photographs taken by government photographers during internment, documenting families in controlled, institutionalized settings; and photographs taken by the families themselves during internment, revealing private moments of dignity and connection, despite their circumstances. These families were fighting to maintain their visual identity, the curator explained, to document themselves rather than be documented by others, to control their own narrative. The parallel to what I had been exploring with the Richardson archives struck me forcefully. The difference between being the subject of someone else's documentation and the creator of your own. The power of self-determination through visual narrative. That evening in my Tokyo hotel room, I made my decision about Marilyn's proposal. I would accept the responsibility of the Richardson archive, but with an expanded vision. Not just as a family record, but as an evolving examination of how visual documentation shapes belonging across generations. A project with both personal and universal dimensions. I returned to Portland energized by new ideas and perspectives. Ethan and Eleanor met me at the airport, my daughter holding a handmade sign decorated with Japanese symbols she had carefully copied. As we drove home, Eleanor peppered me with questions about Japanese children and their families, while Ethan filled me in on developments at his architectural firm. It wasn't until we were home, unpacking my equipment and sorting through laundry, that Ethan mentioned Marilyn had been hospitalized briefly while I was away. What? I stopped mid-motion, a camera bag suspended in my hands. Why didn't anyone tell me? Mom insisted we shouldn't interrupt your work, Ethan explained, his expression apologetic. It was just exhaustion and dehydration from packing up the house. She's fine now, back home with strict orders to take it easy. I set down my equipment, processing this information. The downsizing is moving forward then? Ethan nodded. They've accepted an offer on the house. The condo will Be ready next month. He hesitated. There's going to be a lot of family history to sort through. Mom's already talking about which pieces should go where. The undercurrent was clear. The redistribution of family heirlooms and memorabilia would be a delicate process, laden with emotional significance. I made a mental note to check in with Marilyn soon, but decided to give myself a day to recover from jet lag first. That recovery day stretched to 3 as my body readjusted to the time difference. On the 4th morning after my return, I woke early, made myself tea, and sat in our garden while the house was still quiet. The morning light created perfect conditions for photography, soft, diffuse illumination that revealed textures and details often lost in harsher light. On impulse, I retrieved my camera and began documenting the space. The herb garden Eleanor had planted under her grandmother's guidance, the handcrafted bench Richard had made for our anniversary, the wind chimes from our trip to Cannon Beach last summer. These ordinary elements of our home carried the accumulated weight of family connection, each object telling a story of relationship and belonging. Later that morning, I called Marilyn. Her voice sounded tired but determined as she assured me she was following doctor's orders. "I'm delegating," she said, a hint of humor in her tone. Richard is astonished. "I'd like to see the new place," I offered, "and to talk about the archive proposal. I've given it a lot of thought while I was away." We arranged to meet the following day at the condominium, which was still empty but ready for their inspection visit. When I arrived, I found Marilyn already. There, standing in the center of what would become their new living room, a floor plan spread out on a folding table. She looked smaller somehow, less commanding in the empty space, but her smile was warm as she greeted me. "Welcome home, traveler. I want to hear everything about Japan." "First," I said firmly, "I want to hear why you didn't tell me you were in the hospital." She waved dismissively. "It was nothing, just a reminder that I'm not 30 anymore." She indicated the floor plan. "What do you think? Will this space work for family gatherings?" I recognized the deflection, but decided not to press the health issue for now. Instead, I studied the layout she had created for the new space. It was thoughtfully designed to maintain the tradition of family gatherings while acknowledging the reality of downsizing. The dining area would still accommodate everyone, though more intimately arranged than in the sprawling Lake Oswego house. "It's lovely," I said sincerely. "Different, but still very much you." She seemed pleased with this assessment. Different, but still me. That could describe quite a lot these days. She gestured toward the large windows overlooking the river. I thought this wall would be perfect for a selection from the archive, key images that tell the Richardson story through the generations. I moved to stand beside her, envisioning the possibilities. "Including Keiko?" "Especially Keiko," she confirmed. "Her story belongs in our visual history, as does yours." She turned to face me directly. "Have you thought about the proposal?" "I have," I replied. "I'd like to accept, but with an expanded vision for the project." We sat on the window ledge, sunlight streaming around us, as I shared the insights from my Japan research, how the archive could evolve beyond family documentation into a more expansive exploration of visual narrative and belonging, how we might develop educational components, perhaps even establish it as a resource for other families exploring their own visual histories. Marilyn listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated her grasp of the vision. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "It's perfect," she said. "Exactly what the archive should become. Something that honors our specific family history while connecting to these universal patterns you've identified." The ease of her acceptance, her embrace of this evolution rather than resistance to change, illustrated how profoundly our relationship had transformed over the years. "I've drafted some revisions to the agreement," she continued, reaching for her bag and withdrawing a folder. "After our conversation about Keiko, I realized we needed stronger language about inclusion, ensuring that all family members are documented regardless of." She paused, searching for the right words, regardless of how comfortable their presence makes everyone else. The self-awareness in this statement, her recognition of her own past behavior without defensiveness, moved me deeply. As we reviewed the documents together, making notes and suggestions, I observed how naturally we had developed this collaborative rhythm. The woman who had once seen me as a threat to family tradition now viewed me as its most appropriate guardian and interpreter. When we finished, she folded the papers carefully and returned them to her bag. "I'll have the attorney make these revisions. We should be able to formalize everything before the move." We walked through the rest of the condominium, discussing placement of furniture and family photographs, the logistics of the move, which items would go to which family members. Throughout the conversation, I noticed Marilyn tiring, though she tried to hide it, pausing slightly longer between sentences, leaning against door frames as we moved from room to room. "Let's sit for a minute," I suggested, gesturing toward the window ledge again. "I want to show you some of my Japan photographs." She accepted gratefully, settling beside me as I opened my tablet and began sharing images. I narrated the stories behind the photographs, the elderly couple who had been married 62 years and still took a formal portrait annually on their anniversary. The young family using digital technology to connect with grandparents overseas. The museum curator preserving photographs that had survived the Hiroshima bombing. Marilyn studied each image with genuine interest, asking perceptive questions about composition and context. As we reached the final photographs, a series documenting 3 generations of a family preparing traditional food together, she grew contemplative. "You know," she said finally, "when Ethan first told us he was engaged, I had a very specific idea of who his wife should be. Someone from our social circle, someone who understood our traditions without explanation, someone who would slip seamlessly into the Richardson way of doing things." The candor of this admission surprised me, though the sentiment itself did not. When he brought you home instead, this creative, independent woman with your own strong sense of identity, I saw only threat, not opportunity. She turned to look at me directly. I couldn't have been more wrong. The Richardson way needed disruption, needed your perspective. The acknowledgement felt like the closing of a circle, the final articulation of a truth we had both recognized gradually over the years but never stated so explicitly. "Thank you," I said simply, knowing she would understand the depth of meaning behind those 2 words. She squeezed my hand briefly, then returned her attention to the photographs. "These would make a wonderful exhibition," she observed. "Perhaps, in conjunction with selections from our archive. The universal patterns you've identified, illustrated through both cultures." The suggestion was exactly right, a natural evolution of the work we had been doing separately and together. "A perfect inaugural project for the formalized archive," I agreed. As we left the condominium an hour later, Marilyn paused in the doorway, looking back at the empty space that would soon become her home. "It will be different," she acknowledged. "Smaller, less grand, but perhaps better suited to who we're becoming now." The observation applied to far more than just the physical space. It captured the evolution of the Richardson family itself, less concerned with outward appearance and tradition, more focused on authentic connection. Less rigid in its definition of belonging, more inclusive of diverse perspectives and experiences. Over the following weeks, the process of emptying the Richardson family home became a family-wide project. Each weekend found various combinations of children, spouses, and grandchildren sorting through decades of accumulated possessions, deciding what would move to the condominium, what would be distributed among family members, what would be donated or sold. I expected the process to be emotionally charged, perhaps even contentious at times. Instead, it became an unexpected opportunity for family connection and storytelling. Each object prompted memories and anecdotes, many of which I captured in audio recordings for the archive. The formal silver tea service that had intimidated me at my first Richardson family gathering, the grandfather clock that had chimed through 3 generations of family milestones, the holiday decorations that had appeared year after year with ritualistic precision. Marilyn approached the process with surprising detachment, willingly parting with items I had assumed she would insist on keeping. When I commented on this, she smiled thoughtfully. "I'm discovering the difference between preserving memories and preserving objects," she explained. "The tea service isn't the memory of those gatherings. The photographs and stories are." This distinction between the physical artifacts of family history and its essence seemed to liberate her. She became more interested in documenting the stories behind objects than in keeping the objects themselves. One Saturday afternoon, as we worked through the contents of the formal dining room, Eleanor discovered a hidden compartment in the antique sideboard. Inside was a small wooden box containing photographs we had never seen before. Images from the 1940s showing Richard's parents as a young couple before his birth. Unlike the formal portraits that dominated the family albums from that era, these were candid shots. The couple laughing on a beach, sharing an ice cream cone, caught in unguarded moments of genuine connection. "They look so happy," Eleanor observed, studying the images with the careful attention she brought to everything visual. "And so young." Marilyn examined the photographs with visible emotion. "I never saw them like this," she said softly. "By the time I joined the family, they were already the formal, somewhat intimidating in-laws I came to know." She looked up at me. "Where should these go in our archive?" The question, her automatic inclusion of me in decisions about family, history, felt like the most natural thing in the world now. "I think they belong with the other documentation of that generation," I replied, "but with a special note about how they were discovered and how they differ from the formal imagery that dominated that era." She nodded, satisfied with this approach. "Eleanor should write the note," she added, smiling at my daughter, "since she made the discovery." The gesture, including Eleanor not just as a subject of the family archive, but as a contributor to its curation, represented another evolution in how the Richardsons thought about family documentation. No longer the sole domain of the matriarch, but a collaborative, multi-generational project. As the moving date approached, I found myself experiencing unexpected emotions about the change. The Richardson family home had been the site of so many significant moments in my history with this family, from those early uncomfortable gatherings where I felt perpetually out of place to more recent celebrations where I moved with confidence and belonging. Despite the difficult beginnings, I felt a certain nostalgia for this space that had witnessed such profound transformation. 2 days before the move, Marilyn called with an unexpected request. "I'd like you to do one final photo session in the house," she said. "Not a formal portrait, but documentation of the empty rooms before we leave them completely." The request intrigued me. "What are you envisioning?" "Spaces that hold memories but are no longer inhabited," she explained. "The rooms themselves as a kind of family portrait." It was an artistic concept I wouldn't have expected from her, more aligned with my documentary approach than her traditionally formal aesthetic. "I'd be happy to," I agreed. "When were you thinking?" "Tomorrow evening," she suggested, "when the light comes through the west windows. Just you and me." The following evening found us alone in the nearly empty house, most furniture already moved to the condominium or distributed to family members. I moved through the rooms with my camera, capturing the quality of light, the marks on walls where pictures had hung for decades, the subtle indentations in carpets where furniture had stood. Marilyn followed quietly, occasionally pointing out details I might have missed. The height measurements penciled inside a kitchen doorframe tracking grandchildren's growth. The small repair in the dining room ceiling from when a champagne cork had gone astray one New Year's Eve. The worn spot on the stair rail where generations of hands had traced the same path. As the sun began to set, casting long golden light across the empty living room floor. Marilyn stood in the center of the eye. Space, her expression contemplative. "Would you mind if I took your portrait here?" I asked. "One final image in this space that was so central to your role in the family?" She nodded, remaining where she stood as I adjusted my camera settings. Unlike her usual careful preparation, for family photographs, the attention to clothing, positioning, expression, she made no effort to compose herself. She simply stood in the light, allowing me to capture her as she was in that moment. A woman in transition, standing between past and future, illuminated by the same light that had witnessed decades of family history. As I reviewed the image on my camera display, I was struck by its power. Marilyn Richardson, once so concerned with perfect presentation, now allowing herself to be documented in a moment of genuine vulnerability. The woman who had once excluded me from family photographs now inviting my lens to capture her most authentic self. "Would you like to see?" I offered, turning the display toward her. She studied the image for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally. "That's exactly right. That's who I am in this moment." She looked up at me, her expression open. "Thank you for seeing me. Not just the image I try to project, but me." The acknowledgement felt profound, a recognition of what my photographic perspective had brought to the Richardson family documentation. Not just technical skill or artistic vision, but a willingness to see and capture authentic humanity beneath carefully constructed surfaces. As we prepared to leave the house for the final time, Marilyn paused at the front door. "I've been thinking about those early years," she said quietly. "About how I tried to keep you out of the family photographs, out of the family story." I waited, sensing she needed to say something she had never fully articulated. "I want you to know that I understand now what I was really doing," she continued. "It wasn't about traditions or proper appearances. It was about control, about protecting my position as the one who defined who belonged and who didn't." She met my gaze directly. "I was wrong. And I'm sorry." The words I had never expected to hear, the explicit apology for those years of exclusion, hung in the air between us. Not hinted at through changed behavior, not implied through symbolic gestures, but stated plainly and directly. "Thank you," I said simply, knowing she would understand all that those words contained. She nodded, then turned to look once more at the empty house before closing the door behind us. "Now," she said with unexpected lightness, "let's go create some new images in a new space." As we walked to our cars in the gathering dusk, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point, from deliberate exclusion to genuine collaboration, from power struggle to mutual respect, from a narrow definition of family to one expansive enough to incorporate difference and change. The woman who had once banned me from family photos was now not only begging to be in mine, but trusting me to document her most vulnerable moments, to carry forward the visual history of her family, to expand and reinterpret what that history meant. It wasn't just a reversal of our original dynamic. It was a complete transformation of how we both understood family, documentation, and belonging. A new way of seeing that would shape not just our relationship, but the visual legacy we were creating together for generations to come. The Richardson Archive exhibition opened on a rainy Tuesday evening in November, transforming the Portland Art Museum's contemporary wing into a journey through family visual documentation across cultures and generations. The culmination of 2 years of intensive work following Marilyn and Richard's move, it represented the official launch of the Richardson Family Archive as a formal institution, complete with educational programs and research initiatives. I stood near the entrance, watching the first visitors move through the carefully arranged displays. The exhibition integrated materials from the Richardson family collection, with images from my Japan project and contemporary family documentation from diverse communities across Portland. The narrative traced how family photography had evolved from formal posed portraiture designed to project specific cultural ideals to more authentic documentation of genuine connection. Eleanor, now 10 and taking her role as the youngest curator seriously, was stationed beside an interactive display she had helped design. It allowed visitors to explore how family photographs reflected changing concepts of who counted as family across different time periods and cultures. I watched proudly as she guided a group of older women through the interface, her explanations articulate and thoughtful beyond her years. "She has your eye for visual detail and Marilyn's gift for clear explanation," Ethan observed, appearing at my side with 2 glasses of champagne. A formidable combination. I accepted the glass gratefully. "And your ability to connect with people instantly. The docents are already calling her their secret weapon for engaging reluctant teenagers." Across the room, I spotted Marilyn in animated conversation with the museum director, gesturing toward a display that juxtaposed photographs of the Richardson family's Silver Creek Falls outings across 3 generations with similar multi-generational nature excursions from Japanese, Indian, and Nigerian families. Even from a distance, I could see her characteristic energy and precision, though tempered now by a physical fragility that had become increasingly apparent over the past year. The health issues that had begun with her hospitalization during my Japan trip had evolved into something more chronic, a heart condition that required regular monitoring and had limited her physical stamina. She had adapted with characteristic determination, focusing her energy strategically on the projects that mattered most to her. The archive had become her primary focus, a legacy project that seemed to energize her even as her physical strength diminished. "Your mother looks well tonight," I commented to Ethan. "The exhibition clearly agrees with her." He nodded, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. "This has been keeping her going. She was up at 5 this morning, reviewing her notes for the media interviews." As if sensing our attention, Marilyn glanced in our direction and beckoned us over. "The director wants to discuss expanding the educational programming," she explained as we joined them. "Given the response to the exhibition preview, they're interested in developing curriculum materials for schools." The conversation that followed explored possibilities I hadn't even considered. How the archive's approach to visual documentation might become a resource for teaching history, cultural studies, even digital citizenship in an era of constant image sharing. Marilyn listened intently, occasionally catching my eye to gauge my reaction to particular suggestions. This seamless collaboration, her natural inclusion of me in decisions, her implicit trust in my judgment, had become so normal that it was sometimes difficult to remember how differently our relationship had begun. The woman who had once worked so diligently to exclude me from family documentation was now my most committed partner in expanding and interpreting that very record. As the opening reception continued, I circulated through the exhibition, observing visitors' interactions with the displays. Many lingered at what we had come to call the Keiko Corner, a section dedicated to the story of Richard's grandfather's second wife. The woman systematically erased from Richardson family history until the discovery of those hidden photographs. We had succeeded in learning more about her in the intervening years. Richard's outreach to distant relatives had yielded letters, additional photographs, and eventually contact with Keiko's niece, now an elderly woman living in Seattle. Through these sources, we had pieced together her story, how she had met Richard's grandfather while working as a nurse in the hospital where he was treated after a heart attack, their unlikely romance blooming despite social disapproval in the early 1960s, their brief marriage before his death, and her subsequent erasure from family narrative. The display included not only the original photographs Marilyn had discovered, but letters between the couple, documents relating to their marriage, and most powerfully, contemporary portraits of Keiko's niece and her family. The visual lineage connected past to present, transforming Keiko from a footnote in Richardson history to a woman with her own story, her own descendants, her own place in the interwoven narratives of multiple families. "It's quite extraordinary," a voice observed. Beside me, I turned to find Natalie studying the display, her expression thoughtful. Growing up, we never heard a word about her. It's like discovering a parallel family history we never knew existed. That's exactly what it is, I agreed. A part of your heritage that was deliberately hidden because it didn't fit the official narrative. She nodded slowly. It makes me wonder what other stories might be missing, whose else's voices weren't preserved because they were inconvenient to the main storyline. The observation was insightful, exactly the kind of critical thinking we had hoped the exhibition might provoke. Natalie had evolved considerably from the young woman who had once avoided my eyes at Silver Creek Falls, uncomfortable with her mother's orchestrated exclusion, but unwilling to challenge it. Now a mother of teenagers herself, she had developed a more nuanced understanding of family dynamics and the courage to question inherited narratives. That's why we included the interactive oral history booth, I explained, gesturing toward a curtained area at the rear of the exhibition. Visitors can record family stories they feel have been overlooked or suppressed. We're creating an archive of the untold alongside the officially documented. Mom said that was your idea, Natalie remarked. It's brilliant, democratizing family narrative. The appreciation in her voice, her recognition of my contribution to reimagining family documentation, felt like yet another measure of how completely the Richardson family dynamics had transformed over the years. As the evening progressed, I found myself continuously aware of Marilyn's presence in the space. Though she moved more slowly now, pausing occasionally to rest on the strategically placed benches, her engagement never wavered. She spoke with journalists, chatted with museum patrons, and guided family members through the displays with evident pride. When the formal program began, the museum director invited both of us to the small podium to speak about the exhibition's genesis and significance. Marilyn deferred to me to begin, a public acknowledgement of my role that would have been unthinkable in those early years of our relationship. I spoke briefly about the universal patterns we had discovered in family visual documentation across cultures, the tension between authentic representation and idealized presentation, the power dynamics embedded in who controls the visual narrative, the evolution from formal documentation of family structure to capturing genuine emotional connection. When I finished, Marilyn stepped forward. Though physically diminished, her voice remained strong, her presence commanding. What began as a simple project to digitize old family photographs evolved into something far more profound, she began. A reconsideration of how visual documentation shapes our understanding of belonging across generations. She gestured toward various sections of the exhibition. In these images, we see not just who was included in the family portrait, but who was excluded, and what those choices reveal about power, acceptance, and the definition of family itself. Her gaze found me in the small crowd. It took someone with both outsider perspective and insider commitment to help us see these patterns. Someone whose own experience of exclusion gave her unique insight into what family documentation really means. The public acknowledgement, her explicit recognition of how my early marginalization had later become a source of valuable perspective, moved me deeply. It represented a level of self-awareness and growth that illustrated just how profoundly she had evolved. The Richardson archive is not just about preserving our specific family history, she continued. It's about understanding the universal human need to document connection, to create visual evidence of belonging, to see ourselves as part of something larger than our individual lives. As she concluded her remarks to enthusiastic applause, I watched Richard move immediately to her side, his arm supporting her discreetly as they moved toward the reception area. The tenderness between them after 50 years of marriage was palpable. Another kind of documentation, wordless but profound. The exhibition's opening marked a milestone in the evolution of the Richardson archive, cementing its transition from private family project to public educational resource. In the months that followed, the archive's profile continued to grow, with articles in national publications, inquiries from researchers, and requests for traveling versions of the exhibition from museums across the country. Marilyn approached this expanding vision with characteristic thoroughness, working with attorneys to formalize the archive's structure, securing its financial future through a substantial endowment, and developing succession plans that would ensure its continuity beyond her lifetime. Though she never spoke directly about the timeline she envisioned, the urgency behind these preparations was unmistakable. In February, as we worked together in the small office space we had established for archive business, she broached a subject that clearly had been on her mind. "I've been thinking about the archive's next major project," she began, her tone deliberately casual as she sorted through digitized photographs on her tablet. "What would you think about focusing on excluded narratives more broadly? Not just Keiko's story, but a more comprehensive examination of who gets left out of family visual documentation and why." The suggestion aligned perfectly with directions I had been considering. "That sounds exactly right," I agreed. "We could broaden beyond the Richardson history to include other families' experiences of exclusion and erasure." She nodded, pleased. With this alignment of vision, "I've already spoken with the museum about securing grant funding. They're quite enthusiastic." She paused, then added with subtle emphasis, "Of course, you would be the principal investigator. I would serve more as an advisor at this stage." The implication was clear. She was preparing for a time when she would no longer be actively involved in the archive's daily operations, positioning me to assume full leadership. "I appreciate your confidence," I said carefully, "but I still value our collaboration tremendously. Your institutional memory and historical perspective are irreplaceable." She smiled slightly, acknowledging what I was really saying, that I wasn't ready to envision the archive without her direct involvement. "Thank you, but part of effective leadership is preparing for transition." She tapped her tablet, bringing up a document. "I've outlined some initial thoughts on potential research directions. When you have time, I'd welcome your feedback." Later that evening, reviewing her notes at home, I was struck by how thoroughly she had internalized the archive's evolving vision, how completely she had embraced approaches to visual documentation that would have been alien to her just a decade earlier. The woman who had once insisted on rigid formality in family portraiture was now advocating for documenting displaced narratives, exploring visual marginalization, and prioritizing authentic representation over idealized presentation. The transition in our personal relationship mirrored this evolution, from her initial rejection of my presence in family documentation to her current insistence that I take the lead in preserving and interpreting the visual record. The symmetry felt both poetic and profound. Spring brought both unexpected opportunities and challenges. The archive received significant grant funding for the Excluded Narratives Project, allowing us to hire a small staff and expand our research scope. Simultaneously, Marilyn's health took a concerning turn, requiring a brief hospitalization and adjustment of her medications. Though she returned home after just 3 days, the episode left her noticeably weakened. For the first time, she began explicitly delegating responsibilities she had previously managed herself, passing more of the archive's administrative functions to me and the new staff. "I need to be strategic with my energy," she explained when I visited her at home during her recovery. "Focus on the conceptual direction rather than operational details." We sat in the condominium's sunroom, overlooking the river. Though smaller than the Lake Oswego house, the space reflected Marilyn's refined aesthetic, elegant without being formal, comfortable without sacrificing sophistication. Family photographs lined the walls, now a mixture of traditional portraits and the more candid, authentic images I had captured over the years. "I've been reviewing some of the oldest Richardson photographs," she said, gesturing toward an archival box on the table between us, "from the 1890s and early 1900s. I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before." She carefully extracted a sepia-toned image of a formal family grouping, stern-faced ancestors in Victorian attire, arranged according to the conventions of the era. "Look at the margins," she instructed, handing me a magnifying loupe. Just behind the family group. I examined the photograph carefully, focusing on the edges she indicated. There, partially visible in the background, were figures I had never noticed before. Household staff, perhaps, or farm workers, their features indistinct, but their presence undeniable. "They're in almost all the early photographs," Marilyn continued, showing me several more examples. "Always at the margins, never acknowledged, but present nonetheless. People who were part of daily family life, but not considered part of the family itself." The observation was astute, exactly the kind of visual analysis we had been developing through the archive project. "Another layer of exclusion," I noted. "Not completely erased like Keiko, but relegated to the background, their contributions. Unacknowledged." She nodded. "I've asked Richard to research who they might have been. Estate staff, most likely. People who made the Richardson lifestyle possible but weren't included in the family narrative." She met my gaze directly. "Not unlike how I initially treated you. Present but peripheral. Your contributions unacknowledged." The parallel she drew, linking her treatment of me to these historically marginalized figures, demonstrated both self-awareness and a willingness to situate her own behavior within broader patterns of exclusion. It was the kind of critical perspective that had once seemed impossible for her, yet now came naturally. "This could be an important component of the Excluded Narratives Project," I suggested. "The visual documentation of power relationships within household structures across generations." "Exactly what I was thinking," she agreed. "Would you be willing to lead a research team specifically on this aspect? I can provide the historical context for the Richardson materials, but you have the expertise in visual analysis." I agreed readily, recognizing both the scholarly value of the approach and the personal significance of her entrusting this aspect of family history to my interpretation. As Marilyn's physical strength continued to fluctuate through the spring and summer, our working relationship adapted accordingly. Some days found her energetic and fully engaged, spending hours at the archive offices reviewing materials and guiding the new staff. Other days she worked from home, connecting virtually for meetings or focusing on writing components of the research. Throughout these changes, one constant remained: her unwavering commitment to documenting family authentically rather than performatively. This shift in perspective, so profound given her starting point, manifested in unexpected ways. When Eleanor's 11th birthday approached in September, Marilyn suggested a multi-generational women's tea as part of the celebration. "Not the formal kind I would have insisted on years ago," she clarified. "Something that captures the real relationships between the Richardson women across generations." The resulting gathering brought together female relatives from both sides of Eleanor's family, Richardson women alongside my relatives, including my mother who traveled from Denver for the occasion. Rather than the stiff, posed affair such events had once been in Richardson tradition, this celebration was deliberately casual, with the girls and women sharing stories, looking through family photographs, and creating a collaborative visual timeline of female experience across generations. I documented the gathering with both still photography and video, capturing moments of genuine connection. Natalie showing Eleanor and her cousins photographs of grandmother Eleanor as a young woman. My mother and Marilyn discovering their shared love of mystery novels. Richard's sister teaching the girls a hand-clapping game that had been passed down through generations of Richardson women. When I reviewed the images later, I was struck by the transformation they represented, not just in how the Richardson family presented itself visually, but in how it conceptualized belonging. The clear hierarchies and rigid formality that had characterized family documentation when I first entered this world had given way to something more fluid, more inclusive, more authentic. Most remarkable was Marilyn herself. In earlier years, She would have positioned herself centrally in any family gathering, carefully controlling both the event itself and how it was documented. Now she moved easily between foreground and background, sometimes guiding conversations, other times simply observing and appreciating the connections forming around her. Her presence in the visual record was authentic rather than performative, a woman confident enough in her place to no longer need to assert it constantly. As I selected images to include in Eleanor's birthday album, I was conscious of the visual story they told about the evolution of the Richardson family, and specifically, about Marilyn's transformation from rigid guardian of family image to thoughtful facilitator of genuine connection. October brought the first anniversary of the Richardson Archive exhibition, marked by a small reception at the museum where we announced the expansion of our educational programs and the launch of the Excluded Narratives Research Initiative. Marilyn attended, but spoke only briefly, deferring to me for most of the presentation. Afterward, as we walked slowly through the exhibition space, much of the original display still intact, though supplemented with new materials, she linked her arm through mine for support. "I've been meaning to show you something," she said, guiding me toward a quiet corner of the gallery. "It just arrived last week." In a small alcove, separate from the main exhibition flow, hung a new edition I hadn't seen before, a beautifully framed photograph of Marilyn and me, taken at Eleanor's birthday gathering. In the image, we sat side by side on a window seat, both looking at a photograph album open between us, our expressions animated in mid-conversation. The composition captured a moment of genuine connection. Two women with a shared passion for visual documentation, engaged in mutual discovery. "I commissioned this from the print archives," Marilyn explained. "It seemed important to document our collaboration explicitly, to include visual evidence of how the archive itself came to be." The thoughtfulness of this edition, her recognition that our relationship deserved its own place in the documented history, touched me deeply. "It's perfect," I said simply. "Thank you." She squeezed my arm gently. "I should be thanking you. None of this would exist without your vision." As we continued our slow circuit of the exhibition, I noted how visitors still lingered at the Keiko display, drawn to this story of exclusion and rediscovery. A young woman was explaining the narrative to her companion, gesturing toward the photographs with evident emotion. "She sees herself in that story," Marilyn observed quietly. "That's what makes this work meaningful beyond our family. These patterns of inclusion and exclusion resonate across cultural experiences." Her perception was accurate. Through visitor surveys and the oral history booth recordings, we had discovered that the exhibition prompted profound personal reflection, often inspiring people to reconsider their own family visual histories and who might have been excluded from them. By December, Marilyn's health had declined significantly enough that she began receiving regular in-home care. Despite this, she insisted on maintaining her involvement with the archive, though now primarily from her condominium. We established a weekly rhythm where I would bring materials to her and we would work side by side in her sunroom, the winter light illuminating the photographs and documents spread between us. During one such session, as we reviewed proposals for the Excluded Narratives project, she suddenly changed the subject. "I found something yesterday that I think belongs in the archive," she said, reaching for a leather-bound box beside her chair. "But I wanted to discuss it with you first." From the box, she withdrew a small stack of photographs I had never seen before. They were from my wedding to Ethan, but unlike the formal portraits that had been included in the Richardson family albums, these showed candid moments throughout the day. Ethan and me exchanging private glances during the ceremony, dancing, unaware of the camera, sharing quiet conversation in a corner of the reception. "I had a second photographer," Marilyn explained, noting my confusion. "Someone to capture the moments the official photographer might miss. I never showed these to anyone, not even Richard or Ethan." I studied the images with growing emotion. They revealed a dimension of our wedding day I had never seen documented. The authentic connection between Ethan and me, unposed and genuine. Why? I asked, not just about the second photographer, but about her decision to keep these images private. She considered the question carefully. I think I wanted control over all aspects of the visual record. These showed something too real, too genuine, a connection I wasn't ready to acknowledge. She met my gaze directly. They belonged in the family record from the beginning. My withholding them was another form of exclusion. I'd like to correct that now. The admission, her explicit acknowledgement of yet another way she had controlled family documentation to support her preferred narrative, demonstrated a level of self-awareness that would have seemed impossible in those early years. They're beautiful, I said, deeply moved by both the images themselves and the gesture of sharing them now. They should definitely be included in the archive. She nodded, pleased with this decision. I was thinking they might become part of a special exhibition on authentic versus performative documentation in family events. These, alongside the official portraits, would make a powerful visual essay on what different types of photography reveal and conceal. The concept was sophisticated and nuanced, exactly the kind of critical thinking about visual documentation that had transformed the archive from simple family record to cultural resource. As winter deepened, Marilyn's health continued its gradual decline. Though she remained mentally sharp and engaged with the archive work, her physical stamina diminished noticeably. Our working sessions grew shorter, with more frequent rest periods. She began dictating notes rather than writing them, conserving energy for the aspects of the work she found most meaningful. In late January, during one of our bedside archiving sessions, she brought up a subject we had both been carefully avoiding. "We need to discuss the archive's future," she said directly, setting aside the photographs we had been reviewing. "I've been revising the formal documentation to ensure everything is in order for when you assume full directorship." The explicit acknowledgement of her declining health, her recognition that the transition we had been preparing for might come sooner rather than later, created a moment of painful clarity. "I've been thinking about how to honor your vision for the archive," I said carefully, while continuing to evolve its scope and approach. She smiled slightly at this diplomatic response. "Olivia, after all these years, you can be direct with me. We both know my time with the archive is limited. What I need to hear is not how you'll preserve my vision, but how you'll expand it in ways I haven't even imagined." The invitation to think beyond preservation to innovation reflected how completely she had transformed, from a woman concerned with controlling family narrative to one who actively encouraged its evolution beyond her own perspective. "I've been considering how we might expand the Excluded Narratives project internationally," I offered, accepting her invitation to candor, building on my Japan research to examine patterns of visual inclusion and exclusion across diverse cultural contexts. She nodded encouragingly. "Go on." "And I've been thinking about the digital future of family documentation," I continued. "How social media and smartphone photography are transforming who controls the family image, who gets included, how authenticity competes with careful curation." As I outlined these and other potential directions, Marilyn listened with evident engagement, occasionally asking clarifying questions or suggesting connections to the archive's existing work. There was no hint of proprietary control in her response, only genuine intellectual curiosity and enthusiasm for how the project might evolve. "This is exactly right," she said when I had finished. "The archive shouldn't be static, a monument to Richardson family history, or even to our particular approach to visual documentation. It should be a living resource that continues to explore how families see themselves and determine who belongs." Her generosity of spirit, her willingness to envision the archive's evolution beyond her direct involvement, moved me deeply. The woman who had once guarded Richardson family imagery with such rigid control now embraced the prospect of its continued transformation under someone else's guidance. I've updated the legal framework to give you maximum flexibility, she added, indicating a folder on her bedside table. Complete creative and administrative control, with funding secured for at least the next decade. The thoroughness of these preparations, her determination to ensure the archive's future, even as her own became increasingly uncertain, reflected both practical foresight and profound trust in my stewardship. As February gave way to early hints of spring, Marilyn's condition worsened. A brief hospitalization resulted in the difficult decision to begin hospice care at home, with medical professionals acknowledging that further interventions would provide limited benefit. With characteristic determination, she insisted on continuing our archive work, though now in shorter sessions adapted to her diminishing energy. She approached these conversations with remarkable clarity, focusing on her highest priorities for the archive's future. "There's one more project I want to ensure is documented in the plan," she said during one such session, her voice weaker, but her mental focus unchanged. "Something I've been considering since we discovered Eliza's photography." I sat beside her bed, notebook ready to capture her thoughts as she outlined a project examining women's control of family visual narratives across generations, how maternal figures had influenced who was documented and how the shifting power dynamics as technology democratized photography, the distinct patterns in how women photographed family compared to how men did. "This should be a major research initiative," she explained. "Not just academic, but practical. Workshops for mothers and grandmothers on documenting family authentically, exhibitions exploring the feminine perspective in family photography, publications examining how women's approach to visual documentation differs from the male gaze." The scope and ambition of the vision impressed me. Here she was, physically diminished, yet intellectually vibrant, planning projects that would extend years beyond her lifetime. "I'll make sure it happens," I promised, recognizing the importance of this particular initiative to her legacy. She nodded, satisfied with this commitment. "I believe it will resonate with many women who have felt their perspective on family history go unrecognized." As March arrived, bringing unexpected early warmth that coaxed crocuses and daffodils from the soil, Marilyn's condition stabilized temporarily, not improving, but not actively declining. She used this period of relative stability to finalize her wishes for both the archive and her personal affairs. One afternoon, as we sat together in her sunroom reviewing materials for an upcoming exhibition, she surprised me with an unexpected request. "I'd like you to take my portrait," she said. "One final professional image for the archive." The request caught me off guard. Marilyn had always been meticulous about how she was photographed, preferring formal, carefully composed images that presented her at her best. Yet now, physically diminished by illness, she was requesting documentation in her most vulnerable state. "Of course," I agreed. "What kind of portrait do you envision?" "Honest," she said simply. "No pretense, no performance. Just me as I am now, at the end of this journey." The directness of her request, her willingness to be documented authentically rather than ideally, represented the culmination of her transformation in how she understood family visual documentation. The following day, I returned with my camera and minimal equipment. No studio lights, no reflectors, nothing that would create an artificially polished image. Just natural light and my most sensitive lens. She had prepared for the session with characteristic care, dressed in a simple blue dress that had always been one of her favorites. Her hair arranged neatly, though, without the perfect coiffure she had once insisted upon. She sat in her favorite chair by the window, the river visible beyond her, family photographs arranged on the wall behind. "How do you want to approach this?" I asked, setting up my tripod. "You decide," she said. "I trust your vision." The 3 words contained years of evolution, from the woman who had once controlled every aspect of family imagery to one who now willingly placed herself in my hands, accepting my perspective as valuable. I worked slowly, capturing her from different angles and distances, sometimes directing slightly, other times simply observing. Throughout the session, she remained present and engaged, neither performing for the camera nor resisting it, simply allowing herself to be seen. When I reviewed the images afterward, one stood out immediately. Marilyn gazed directly into the camera, her expression reflective but unguarded. Years of experience visible in the lines of her face, vulnerability, evident in her physical frailty, but her eyes alive with the same intelligence and determination that had always characterized her. It was Marilyn Richardson as she truly was, not the carefully curated matriarch of earlier documentation, but a complex woman nearing the end of a life marked by both rigid traditionalism and remarkable growth. When I showed her the selected image a few days later, she studied it in silence for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally. "That's exactly right. That's who I really am." The acceptance of this authentic documentation, her willingness to be seen without performance or idealization, felt like the culmination of her journey from controlled presentation to genuine representation. "Where should this go in the archive?" I asked. She considered the question carefully. With the collection of portraits showing the evolution of family documentation across generations, a visual endpoint to the Richardson tradition of formal portraiture, and perhaps a beginning point for something more authentic. In early April, as cherry blossoms transformed Portland's streets and parks, Marilyn's condition declined rapidly. The family gathered, keeping gentle vigil as she moved in and out of consciousness. Even in these final days, moments of surprising clarity emerged, often focused on ensuring the archive's future was secure. During one such lucid period, she asked to speak with me alone. Richard left the room quietly, squeezing my shoulder as he passed. "I want you to know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that I understand now what family really means. Not performance, not presentation, not control, but authentic connection, seeing and being seen fully." She paused, gathering strength. "You taught me that, through your lens, through your persistence in documenting truth rather than appearance." The acknowledgement, her recognition of how profoundly my approach to photography had transformed her understanding of family itself, moved me deeply. "The Richardson archive isn't just about photographs," she continued. "It's about who belongs, who matters, whose story gets told. I tried to keep you out of that story once. Now I'm entrusting you with writing its future chapters." She reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite her weakness. "Promise me you'll continue to expand our definition of family, to document the authentic rather than the performed, to include rather than exclude." "I promise," I said softly, knowing she would understand the depth of commitment behind those simple words. She nodded, satisfied, and closed her eyes. We sat in silence for some time, her hand still holding mine, the afternoon light streaming through the window illuminating her face in a way that reminded me powerfully of that final portrait. Vulnerable, authentic, real. Marilyn Richardson passed peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by family. The formal obituary detailed her civic contributions, her philanthropic work, her role as matriarch of a prominent Portland family. But it also included, at Richard's insistence, specific mention of the Richardson archive and her collaboration with me in transforming how the family documented and understood its visual history. The memorial service, held at the Art Museum, where our exhibition still stood, incorporated elements that would have been unimaginable at a Richardson family event a decade earlier. Rather than formal, posed photographs of Marilyn decorating the space, we created a visual journey showing her evolution, from rigid family guardian to thoughtful collaborator, from controller of family image to facilitator of authentic documentation. The final image in this visual narrative was the portrait I had taken in those last weeks. Marilyn as she truly was, without pretense or performance. As guests moved through the space, I overheard countless conversations about how the images revealed a woman many of them had known for decades but never fully seen. How the chronological display showed not just physical aging, but profound personal growth, a willingness to evolve that had transformed not only her understanding of family, documentation, but her relationships with those closest to her. After the formal service, as family and close friends gathered at the condominium, Richard approached me with a small package. "Marilyn wanted you to have this," he explained, his voice rough with emotion. "She was quite specific that it should be given to you today." The package contained a small silver frame, antique and clearly valuable. Inside was not a photograph but a handwritten note in Marilyn's distinctive script. "For the woman who taught me that true family documentation isn't about controlling the narrative, but about capturing authentic connection. This frame has held Richardson family photographs for 4 generations. It now belongs to you to fill with whatever image represents family as you understand it. With profound gratitude for showing me a better way to see Marilyn." As I held this tangible symbol of acceptance and belonging, this explicit acknowledgement of my place not just in the family's present, but in its historical continuity, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us here. From deliberate exclusion to honored inclusion. From being banned from family photos to becoming their official guardian. From outsider to essential collaborator. The transformation wasn't just in how Marilyn had come to see me, but in how the entire Richardson family now understood visual documentation itself, not as careful curation of ideal presentation, but as authentic capture of genuine connection. Not as rigid adherence to traditional family structures, but as flexible embracing of evolving relationships. Not as control of who belongs in the frame, but as celebration of diverse perspectives within it. In the weeks that followed, as I assumed, full directorship of the Richardson archive, I found myself returning often to that final portrait of Marilyn. It represented not just the end of her life, but the culmination of her evolution. A woman who had learned, however belatedly, to value authenticity over appearance, inclusion over exclusion, genuine connection over controlled presentation. The woman who had once banned me from family photos had ultimately not only begged to be in mine, but entrusted me with documenting her most vulnerable moments, with carrying forward the visual history of her family, with expanding and reinterpreting what that history meant. It wasn't just a reversal of our original dynamic, it was a complete transformation of how we both understood family, documentation, and belonging. A new way of seeing that would shape not just our relationship, but the visual legacy we had created together for generations to come. As I placed a print of that final portrait in the silver frame she had given me, I realized that perhaps the most powerful family photograph isn't one that shows perfect arrangement or ideal presentation. It's one that documents genuine growth, the capacity to evolve beyond inherited patterns, to recognize error, to embrace new perspectives, to see and be seen authentically and completely across the boundaries that once seemed insurmountable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.